Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a profoundly disruptive 2,000-year-old story that, honestly, it completely flips our modern ideas of success, responsibility, and purpose right on their head. To really grasp the weight of this, we've got to look at the timing. Jesus actually shared the parable of the talents on the Tuesday of Passion Week. This is literally mere days before his crucifixion. The tension in Jerusalem was at an absolute boiling point, right? And Jesus was urgently preparing his followers for his imminent departure. So while on the surface, this might just look like a quaint story about ancient currency, it's actually a super high-stakes, profound roadmap for spiritual readiness and what it genuinely means to live a meaningful life.
Okay, let's bust a major myth right off the bat regarding what a biblical talent actually was. A really vital historical anchor to keep in mind here is the sheer scale of what's being discussed. When we hear the word talent, we naturally think of, an innate ability, like playing the piano or having a knack for public speaking. But back in the ancient Greco-Roman world, a talent was a staggering unit of weight, often measuring around 75 pounds of solid silver or gold. To put that kind of wealth into perspective, just one single talent was equivalent to about 20 years of wages for an ordinary day laborer. Think about that. The master in this story isn't handing out a little bit of startup capital or pocket change. No, he's entrusting an absolutely vast, life-altering fortune to his servants.
And that brings us right to our first core theme, divine ownership. Notice the precise phrasing here in Matthew chapter 25. The master called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. In antiquity, wealthy landowners frequently traveled for extended periods, leaving their estates in the hands of trusted managers. But the absolutely crucial detail here is that the wealth never actually changed ownership. The master is simply preparing for a journey, and he's transferring the management of his vast estate, not the title deed, into the hands of his servants while he's away.
So while the literal narrative deals with massive amounts of ancient bullion, that immense wealth left behind represents every single resource and opportunity entrusted to believers today. Spiritually speaking, these talents cover a massive spectrum. It includes our natural gifts and financial resources for sure, but it also extends to our time, our unique spiritual callings, and our spheres of influence. For example, the daily influence you might have as a manager in a modern workplace, or even just the specific network of friends you interact with. That's a talent. Absolutely everything you have at your disposal to make an impact in this world has been intentionally entrusted to you by the master.
It really shifts your perspective completely when you realize a steward isn't an owner. They're a caretaker. Honestly, it removes the heavy pressure of ownership, but it immensely elevates the duty of management. This right here is the bedrock of the biblical worldview regarding our lives. If you're a caretaker of property that ultimately belongs to a sovereign God, well, the goal of your life isn't to fiercely hoard resources just for your own comfort. Instead, the goal is to manage those resources in a way that directly honors the intentions and the character of the true owner.
Now, this principle of ownership sets the stage beautifully for evaluating the results. The master distributes the talents according to each servant's individual ability. He gives 5 to the first, 2 to the second. The text explicitly tells us the 5-talent servant immediately went to work, traded, and gained 5 more. And the 2-talent servant did the exact same thing, doubling his master's investment. Now, considering the complexities of ancient Mediterranean supply chains, multiplying that much wealth without modern banking was no walk in the park. But notice the proactive, immediate, and calculated action taken by both of these individuals to generate a real return.
So when the master finally returns, we witness something truly astonishing. He looks at the servant who brought him 5 additional talents and the servant who brought him 2, and he praises both of them with the exact same words. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. He doesn't throw a more lavish banquet for the higher absolute return. The commendation, the joy, the celebration, they are absolutely identical. The master is thrilled not by the numerical dominance of one over the other, but by the dedicated effort of both.
And this perfectly illustrates our second core theme, faithfulness over results. In our modern corporate world, society demands identical or top-tier outcomes, right? We're constantly stacking people against each other in this fierce hierarchy of absolute production. But this ancient parable reveals that God does not grade on a curve. He prioritizes unique, individualized growth. There's literally no competition in the kingdom. The master desires active, courageous spiritual growth based strictly on the specific, unique resources you were originally given. If you were given 2 and you multiplied 2, you are celebrated with the exact same intensity as the one who multiplied 5.
But then we have to confront the tragic reality of the 1-talent servant. This guy takes his staggering amount of entrusted wealth, digs a hole, and just buries it. Now, historically, burying treasure was actually a recognized practice in ancient rabbinic law as a safe harbor against theft. It preserved the asset, sure, but it is a uniquely terrible financial strategy for growth. When the master returns, the servant offers a profoundly self-incriminating excuse. He says, "I was afraid and went and hid thy talent in the earth." He is spiritually paralyzed. Zero risk, zero return, zero action.
The master's devastating rebuke boils down to a few core failures, and it is absolutely vital to understand that his condemnation had nothing to do with a lack of ability. He wasn't punished because he only started with one talent. No, the tragedy was rooted in his fear, his neglect, his laziness, and his profound lack of trust in the master's character. He fundamentally misunderstood who the master was, choosing the perceived safety of the dirt over the active, dynamic risk of faithful stewardship.
Passivity, fueled by fear, is the absolute enemy of stewardship. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Timothy that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Biblical faith isn't just some internal intellectual agreement. It inherently requires outward courage and action. When fear takes the driver's seat in our lives, it prevents obedience, it completely halts spiritual growth, and it leads to squandered potential. The third servant basically allowed his intense fear of failure to completely override his fundamental duty to act.
Which brings us to our third core theme, final accountability. Matthew 25:19 represents the dramatic climax of the entire narrative. It says, "After a long time the Lord of those servants cometh, and reckoneth with them." The period of waiting is definitively over. The time for working and multiplying is past. The master is back, the books are laid wide open, and it is time to settle accounts. The weight of that word, reckoneth, carries an undeniable finality that every single steward must eventually face.
When we trace the eschatological timeline of this parable, it serves as a stunning theological map of history. First, Christ entrusts gifts to his people before his ascension. We are currently living in that long time mentioned in the text. This is the era of active stewardship while the master is away. Second, Christ will return. Third, accounts will be meticulously settled at the final judgment, where every person will give an account for how they lived and what they managed. And finally, eternal rewards are distributed.
What's really deeply fascinating here is the nature of those rewards. The faithful servants are granted greater responsibility, they receive public commendation, and they are invited to literally enter into the joy of their master's presence. While Christian salvation is an unearned gift of grace from beginning to end, this parable clearly shows there are real, eternal rewards and incredibly joyful consequences for a life of active, faithful obedience. What we do here with our entrusted time and resources echoes profoundly into eternity. Now, it's incredibly easy to look at this ancient text through a highly modern lens and see some sort of investment banking seminar. But that drastically misses the point. Let's clear up a few common misunderstandings right now. First, it is not primarily about literal wealth accumulation. It's about holistic spiritual stewardship. Second, God does not compare believers to one another. He looks exclusively at what you did with what you were given. And third, worldly success is entirely irrelevant here. You can be viewed as highly successful by the world's standards while remaining completely unfaithful by the kingdom standards.
Ultimately, this entire parable connects so deeply to the transformative power of the gospel. Christ is the master who entrusts us with unimaginable kingdom responsibilities. And when the grace of the gospel truly takes root in a person's heart, it forcefully replaces that paralyzing fear of the third servant with the courage to take real risks for the kingdom. Faithful stewardship isn't about frantically trying to earn your salvation through good deeds. No, it's about gratefully responding to God's immense grace with devotion, bravery, and action. So I want to leave you with a direct challenge based on everything we've just unpacked. Take a hard look at your own life, your specific resources, your time, and your unique sphere of influence. Are you allowing fear to prevent your obedience? Are you burying your gifts in the dirt out of a desire for comfort, or are you actively multiplying them for the kingdom? What are you doing with the master's talents today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I truly hope this sparks a renewed, courageous sense of purpose in how you steward the incredible gifts you've been given.